Welcome to Beginner's Guide C Programming tutorial videos. In today's tutorial video, we are going to discuss about data types in C program. Data type. What is data type first? Data types specify how we enter the data into our programs and what type of data we enter, because there is a different types of data that we usually enter into a program. It can be an integer, it can be a character, it can be a string, it can be anything. So what type of data are we going to deal with? That is what matters. So C language has some predefined set of data types to handle various type of data that we can use in our program. Each type of data has got the different types of storage capacities. So what is storage capacity? Storage capacity is nothing but, for instance, if you want to store the integer data, so how many bytes it's required in the memory for us to store that integer data. If it is a character or if it is a float or double, each type of data have got the different type of storage capacities. We are going to discuss everything in detail. Data types. Data type has got three types. The first one is basic data type. Second one is derived data type. And the third one is user defined data type. We have got four basic data type, which is nothing but int, char, float and void. Derived data type, we have got string, pointers and arrays. Whereas the user defined data type, the name itself is the user defined data type, meaning that user, us, the programmer, users are the one who is going to declare this type of data. So they have enum, union, structures and the type def. This derived data type and this user defined data type, we are going to discuss each of them in detail as we move on further. But today our main focus is on these basic data types. So we are going to know what is int, what is char, what is float and what is void. As we discussed in the definition, as we saw, we are going to discuss the different types of this basic data type and the storage capacities. Right? Let's move on to the next one. The first one, the basic data type is integer data type. So this integer data type is divided into three parts. We call the integer data type as short integer. We can declare them in our program like short integer. We declare the data type as integer. We declare the integer data type as a long integer. So what does it mean integer? We know what is integer, right? Which is nothing but the number, the whole number. When I say 5, this 5 is the integer data type. So you can declare this number 5 as an integer data type. Since it's an integer data type, it has got three types. You can declare this 5 as a short integer, or you can just use the keyword as an integer, or you can use the keyword as a long integer. So when you declare the data type as a short integer, it needs 2 bytes of memory. When you declare the data type name as int, just int, it required 2 or 4 bytes of memory. This 2 or 4 bytes of memory depends on the type of compiler that you use in your machine. Then when you declare the variable name as a long int, it occupies 4 bytes of memory. So you can use any one of these types based on the requirement. For example, if you wanted to declare the variable name, if you wanted to declare the value as 5, this one can be stored into this int type. if you wanted to, this is an integer value, right? So if you wanted to just store these small numbers, you can use this keyword called int, because it just require 2 bytes or 4 bytes based on the compiler that we use. For example, if you wanted to use the account numbers, usually it's 10-digit number, isn't it? So 10-digit or 9-digit, or sometimes more than 10-digit. Or if you wanted to store the phone numbers, in that case you can't use the data type as int. In that case you need to use the data type as long int. So what is the use of this long? If you wanted to store more than, if you wanted to store something like phone numbers, account numbers, in that case you need to use the data type called long int. So it requires 4 bytes of memory. Then the next one is char. What is char? Which is nothing but if you wanted to store the characters like A, B, C, D, E, F, those are all called characters. If you wanted to store the character, if you wanted to store the numbers, you can use int. You have to use int data type. But if you wanted to store the character, you need to use char as a keyword, as a data type. So here unsigned, it has got 2 types, unsigned, unsigned. So what is the difference between unsigned and signed? When it comes to the signed, you can able to store both positive and negative value. But when you use the data type as unsigned, you can use only positive value. Even in the previous one, this short will be divided into 2 types. This one is signed, this one is unsigned. So what is the difference between the signed and the unsigned? When you use, okay, for example, you can declare the variable name as signed int, then the variable name is A. When you declare the data type as signed, what does it mean? You can able to store both positive and negative, meaning that this A value can be -1 or 0 or +1. But when you declare this int as an unsigned int, maybe some of this example program you would have seen maybe unsigned int, maybe unsigned int A. In this case, if you declare the variable name as unsigned int A, you are allowed to give the value for this variable A only the positive values. If you assign -5 to this variable A, it is not going to be accepted just because of the data type is unsigned. When it comes to the unsigned, you can able to store only the positive value, whereas when the data type is signed, you can store both positive and negative, right? So there is a difference between the signed character and the unsigned character. Even this short is divided into 2 parts: signed short integer, unsigned short integer. Even this integer can be divided into 2 parts: signed integer, unsigned integer. Even this long integer can be divided into 2 parts: signed and unsigned long integer. So this is about the integer and the character. Then the next data type is float. This float can be divided into 3 types. You can use the data type as float, or you can use the data type as double. You can use the data type as long double. So what is the use of this data type float? It can be divided into 3 parts. If you wanted to store the real numbers, what does it mean, real numbers? A number with a decimal value. If you wanted to store 5.07, this is not the integer number, this is a real number. What is integer number? When you say 5, is an integer. When you say 5.07, is not the integer number. When you say 5.07, this one is not the integer number, this is the real number. So if you wanted to store the real numbers, you can use the data type called float or double or long double. So what is the difference between the float and the double? When you wanted to store 5.0, you can use either float as a data type or double as a data type, because both are used to store the real numbers. And in this case, float needs only 4 bytes, but double needs 8 bytes of memory. So you should know on which case you have to use the data type called float, on which case you need to use the data type called double. We will see the difference between the float and double in a different video, maybe the next video. So now, for now, just you should know these three are the type of data that we use to store the real numbers. Then the final one is void. Void is an incomplete type. It means nothing or no type. You can think of void as an absent. Usually we don't use this data type unless otherwise. If you want to return something, if you want to return nothing, you can use this data type name called void. I'm sure that some of these examples you have seen: int, main, in bracket, void. So what does it mean? This function, this main function is going to return nothing just because of this void. This is a void. Let me write it clearly here. Okay, this is void inside. So meaning that void means null or nothing. If you wanted to return nothing, you can use this data type. For example, if a function does not returning anything, its a return type should be void. In this case, this is a function. Integer main is a function. Is not going to return. It's not going to return anything. That is the reason why I had put this void in bracket. So note that you cannot create the variables of void type. So this is about the basic data types in C. In the next video, I'm going to give you the sample program using all these data types. See you in the next tutorial video. Don't forget to subscribe the channel. Thank you.